This is Orsi, the old guy at oldguytalkstome.com, a podcast dedicated to helping older guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. Join me regularly as I share my interviews with experts on various topics that include anti-aging, sex, relationships, and other things that will help you create that life that you want. Now, I want you to do three things. First of all, I want you to subscribe so you don't miss any of this life-changing information. 2, share it with others. And 3, review. Be sure to do all 3. And now for our podcast. Now, I want to make sure that you do 3 things. 1, subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes. 2, share it with your friends because you know they need to hear this information also. To get this stuff so they can have a kick-ass life. And 3, review this podcast. And if you've got a bad review, that's fine too. Be sure to use the link in the program notes to get Cassandra's book, Impact, How I Went Behind Enemy Lines and Our Struggle Against the Far Left. This is a story you gotta read. This is Orsi, the official old guy at oldguytalkstome.com, a podcast dedicated to helping older guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. And folks, I got a special guest today, a little bit off of my normal beaten path, but that's what the old guy does. Sometimes he gets off his normal beaten path. I got with me in the house Cassandra Spencer, and so let me tell you how this story starts. She had me at the first sentence of her media kit. Security escorted me out of the building, not even allowing me to go back to my desk to clear my belongings. I walked to the parking lot across the street, stunned, angry, confused. Then I called my dad. I'll never forget the first question he asked me. Was it worth it? Without a beat of hesitation, I answered yes. So the background here is Cassandra landed a contract position at Facebook, thinking her life was finally coming together. It was her dream job until one day she started to notice odd notes on the accounts of prominent conservatives on the platform. Knowing that people deserve to learn the truth, she entrusted the evidence to Project Veritas and was promptly fired from Facebook. Almost overnight, she found herself in poverty, unemployable, and everything she cared about, including her daughter, taken away from her. Her book, Impact, How I Went Behind Enemy Lines and Our Struggle Against the Far Left. It's not a Project Veritas tell-all book, but it's more a story about her story, which is very, very interesting. And she became an undercover journalist who exposed dishonesty of companies like Facebook and Google, as well as politicians like Beto. I always call him Beta. He's kind of a beta. He's kind of a beta male. Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders, while continuing to fight a family court system that's stacked against her. Searing, hopeful, and honest Cassandra's story is one that we can all relate to in our current social climate. She's a former U.S. Army public affairs officer, Facebook insider turned Project Veritas undercover journalist, and her work has generated millions of views on social media and got a lot of media attention, including Malkin Live. And she's one of the investigations even led to a felony conviction. So we'll want to talk about that. So welcome after that long introduction, and quite a story. But I'm going to start off while I ask all my guests.
Okay.
What is the most important thing you've done today?
The most important thing I've done today, let's see. The most important thing that I've done today is I had a dance lesson, and I'm really getting prepped for this routine that I'm really psyched about doing with one of my coaches.
Okay, what's the routine?
We're doing a duet to The Greatest Showman. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's the story of P.T. Barnum, but
oh yeah.
Yeah, my coach, he's this British guy who used to be in a boy band. We're doing the other side, so we're doing the Zac Efron and Hugh Jackman duet. So
yeah,
that's probably the most important thing I've done today.
Okay, well the old guy's a big fan of P.T. Barnum. I actually even read his autobiography, which if you're
really?
doing that show, you should read his autobiography.
I should. I heard that. I know that the musical's not historically accurate, but I
Nah,
thoroughly
not even,
enjoy the musical regardless.
not even close. Most movies aren't historically accurate, but so now we got that trick question, that gotcha question out of the way. All right. Before all of this started, what was your life like?
My life was, I mean, in some ways it was unusual. I became a mother pretty young. I had my daughter when I was 20 years old, and I put myself through college on an ROTC scholarship while I was waiting tables at a Red Lobster. Um, but aside from that, especially once I got out of college, it was like, I was working, I was in the Army Reserve, but I was ACRC, so I was on and off orders. Um, and just raising my daughter. And then kind of a series of tragic events happened that landed me in Austin, Texas. And that's when life really kind of just took a weird turn um, after I came to Texas and, eventually worked at Facebook.
Okay. Um, when you started out there at Facebook, and this was build your dream job, what did you expect when you got there? Was it what you expected, or was it different, or working at Facebook?
I would say that when I got there, it was pretty much what I expected. So I started at Facebook in 2017. I had been an Army public affairs officer. I had actually been selected for that position because of my proficiency with social media. Ironically, in college, I got in trouble all the time for being goofing around on Facebook as a cadet. And then the Army finds out, oh, we actually have a use for somebody who's good at using Facebook and Twitter and everything else. So when I started at Facebook, I knew it was a left-leaning company. I knew that it was kind of just like, very kind of hipster millennial-y. And so I get there and it was, more or less what I expected at first.
Yeah. So so I got a question because the old guy has had his well, he's had his encounters with Facebook. I'm in the first level of hell with my Facebook account. I think it's called disabled. Uh,
Oh no.
yeah,
That's the first
yeah,
step.
yeah. That's the first step to being like in those old you're too young to know this, but in the old days, in the communist Politburo pictures, like if somebody was out of fell out of grace, their picture would be airbrushed out, of the parade that they were there for the last 20 years. All of a sudden, they're gone. Uh, but so the typical, I got this vision of what the typical Facebook employee is. It's not very pretty. It's kind of, so tell me what the typical Facebook. So I just want to know if I'm like right or wrong, or what's a typical Facebook employee like?
You're probably right. So I mean, largely millennials, which I'm at the older end of the millennials, but I am a millennial. And so, kind of like hipster, like just all over the spectrum. Very diverse workplace, which isn't. I don't think it's a virtue, nor is it a bad thing. It just kind of is. And however, the one thing it's lacking in diversity is diversity of thought. So what's really telling about Facebook is when you walk in, I mean, I kid you not, floor to ceiling, no exaggeration, propaganda posters with like leftist slogans and sayings on it. When you walk into the building and like everywhere, like even in the bathrooms, like just constant propaganda, like in your face. So that's kind of what it's like. It's, a bunch of young people working there, pretty comfortable, laid back environment. All the snacks you could want, free food.
Sure.
So I mean, I was like, especially after being in the Army, I'm like, this is awesome, right? Like, this is great when I started. So as far as like what the typical employee looks like, I don't think there's really like one mold for them. Kind of all over the place, but very just millennially, if that's a descriptor.
Sure, I think I get
you're rid of the millennial.
Do they hate their parents mostly?
Considering I don't know how much you read of the book, I'm
No,
not one to I was like, I'm
yeah.
not one to talk about daddy issues. So.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And we're going to get that. You know what? I told you, like I said, I read about it this morning and stuff like that. But I just kind of let me rephrase that. They strike me as unhappy people.
Yes. There's a lot of people who, there's a lot of people who they want to blame the rest of the world for their problems, and there are a lot of people who kind of walk around with like just a general chip on their shoulder about life in general, which even despite my experiences, I think I've managed to somehow avoid that, even though I'm sure if I wanted to, I could blame, you know, the fact of the matter is there's some problems that I definitely created myself, like getting married at 19 to someone I had known for 2 weeks. That was a decision I made. And then there's other decisions, other things that have happened, like the murder of my best friend that I had absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But
mixed
like I
bag.
said, yeah, I think that I kind of get the picture. They're just generally, and they have no sense of humor. I got to tell you that people in Silicon Valley have no sense of humor. If you're a comedian, do not go up there because you're
No.
gonna die. You're gonna die on the stage. It's gonna be like it's gonna be just quiet all the time.
Oh, most comedians, they won't even go to college campuses, especially in that area anymore.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. I know. I did a short little stint of stand up comedy, and it was interesting. There's also like you can't say that on stage. Like it's funny. We all laughed in the writing room. We all laughed, but you can't say that.
Right.
But it's the funniest line I got. So what? So what? So you're at Facebook and you're working and you're telling people that their content violates community standards and that kind of stuff.
Copyright. I was a
No,
copyright
community
and trademark
standards.
person.
Oh, copyright. So those ambiguous community standards.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've gotten those emails. And so, how long were you there before you started to notice things that were starting to bug you?
Honestly, it didn't take very long. I want to say maybe the first time that I noticed a weird note was, I'm going to guess, 2 to 3 months into me working there. Was the first time I saw it. And like I said, the first time I saw it, I was willing to brush it off as like, oh, that's odd, whatever, move on, especially because I'd be processing thousands of tickets a day. So I don't have time to sit there and dwell on it. But it did stick out in my mind because I was like, I had never seen, there was a code called live action deboost live distribution that appeared in the comment section on the back end of these people's pages. Right. And so the first time I saw it, completely willing to be like, oh, there must have just been something weird on the page or something weird going on. Huh.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see it over and over and over again. And you start noticing that it's only one type of page that this is appearing on.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, you're like, okay, this is a pattern.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why did that bother you?
It bothered me especially because, there's certain actions that are taken on a user. Like when, let's say you talk about these ambiguous community guidelines violations. At least they give you the courtesy of letting you know that they've taken some kind of action on your page, right?
Mm-hmm.
They notify you. This code was being applied to the back end of pages without the user's knowledge. So the user has no way of knowing. They're wondering why their content isn't going out to, their normal audience. And some of these people are spending significant amounts of money on ads on Facebook. And so it struck me as being very wrong, and particularly because I started working there in 2017, and there had already been talk about, I had known there had been discussions, obviously Facebook was not happy about Donald Trump being elected. As a company, there had already been leaked videos of, internal videos from different tech companies, employees crying, like basically having to have these grief sessions, right? And so
Cookies
I
and
could
comfort
see,
animals.
I could see the writing on the wall as far as what was going to happen with the censorship. Because back, like I said, this is 2017 and 2018. Now they're not even trying to hide it.
Oh,
right?
yeah, not at all.
This has gone unchecked. Back then, they were at least, I think, trying to be sneaky about it.
Hmm. Now, is there a way for someone to look at the backside of their Facebook page and see if this stuff is
Absolutely
there?
not.
So
No.
this is all internal. So you can't even access this. So
Right.
that's kind of a crappy deal. You take their money, run their ads, and don't give them their
I mean, and that's one of the reasons. It's like I was like, this is just really wrong. I said, because not only does Facebook make money off of paid ads, but they're harvesting all your data and selling it, right? So people have a right to know what's going on with their pages.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because Facebook, if you try and reach out to them, if you get a response at all, you'll get something like, oh, well, they'll just be like, oh, it's just your content's, crap, basically. And be like, oh, it's just, due to fluctuations in our algorithm, like
Yeah.
regular fluctuations. But
Yeah.
that's not the case at all.
Yeah. No, I suspect strongly that's my my situation too. Um, you're there about 2 or 3 months, and then all of a
Hmm.
sudden this stuff is happening, and something you're seeing, you're noticing these tags on conservatives. I'll call them tags,
Hmm.
notes or whatever, alterations of their accounts to basically decrease their exposure to the world, and so you're noticing this, da da da, and then how long before you start saying, I need to say something, or I need to talk to someone, and you connect with Project Veritas?
So I had been noticing it for a while. Like I want to say it had been going on for like a few weeks. And then just kind of by, you know, call it fate, call it whatever. I had been following James O'Keefe on Twitter. Sorry, that's my
That's okay.
dog.
It's
But
it's live.
yeah, I
That's
was
okay.
like, but I had been following James O'Keefe on Twitter, and he had put out a tweet saying that if there was anyone inside these companies to contact the tip line, the Veritas tips at protonmail.com tip line that they have.
Hmm.
And so at that point in time, there had been no insiders yet. It was completely new. And so I, very hesitantly kind of sent this email like, "Hey, I might have something. I don't really know." Like, I didn't want to oversell it or anything like that. And I reached out, and then it kind of just went from there.
Okay, so you reached out to, and did you hear from James, or did you hear from someone else in his organization, or is that like privy information, or if I have something
Mhm.
that's like none of my beeswax, that's fine. You can just tell me.
Well, I mainly dealt with somebody else who was working at the organization, and I
Hmm.
do kind of go into that in the book that there
Hmm.
was, especially because the insider program was new. There was a lot of kind of confusion at first. There was a lot of distrust on both ends, on my end as well as Project Veritas's end, because I could have been somebody trying to plant a fake story. I could have been, just a crazy person.
Hmm.
Um, there was a very like long process of kind of them vetting and checking this information that I started to give to them.
Yeah. So when you contacted them, uh, how long how long did you continue to work there before you were discovered that you were cooperating with Project Veritas?
Several months.
Several months. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
several months. I would say probably like a good 4 months, I think, maybe
Hmm.
4 or 5 months. And now the only contact I had had with James at that point was at some point he sent me a signed copy of his book and had like given me his personal information. It was like, hey, I'm really happy you decided to reach out to us. And he had written his cell phone number on the back. And obviously I don't have a reason to contact him, so I didn't use it. But then I was home in Maui, and I decided to just send like I was sending out to like pretty much everyone in my phone like a Happy New Year's text, very kind
Sure.
of generic thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so I had sent him a text. I said Happy New Year's. I got one back, and he sent like a selfie of him at some la di da party, and then I sent him a picture of me at my aunt's house back in Maui holding a baby goat, saying your New Year's Eve looks a lot more glamorous than mine. And that was the extent of the entire conversation.
Hmm.
So that happened, New Year's. Beginning of January 2018, Project Veritas releases their first big tech investigation, which was actually an undercover investigation into Twitter. And 2 days after that is when I get called into the Facebook office and I get fired.
Wow. So there was no like warm up, like, it was just like boom, all of a sudden they discovered you. And so how do you think they discovered you?
So they would make employees download beta versions of the apps onto their personal devices, and which is kind of a weird practice now when I think back on it anyway. But I think that those apps pulled data from my personal text messages and like contacts. And I think that after the Twitter investigation came out, because obviously they would have James's phone number because, two-factor authentication on his personal account. And I think they just cross-referenced anyone who had had contact with James O'Keefe.
Oh, okay. So these apps are not just necessarily testing; it's also to track what's going on. And I would assume that's a fairly easy thing.
Now, mind you, I can't confirm that, but that's what makes the most logical sense.
Yeah. Sure.
Especially given what happened, because and I guess we can go into that, what happened the day I got fired, because that's
sure.
quite interesting.
Okay.
So I walk into work, not really thinking much. Like the Twitter thing had just come out, so that was interesting. And the manager, when I arrived for my shift, they're like, "Oh, hey, we need to talk to you in the conference room." Okay. So I go walk over there, and I walk in, and there are 3 people seated at a desk, and the door closes behind me. And like, I just remember hearing that click of the door and thinking to myself, this is not good. So it's 3 people from the contract company, because I was a contractor at Facebook, even though I worked on site at their facility. And they tell me that the client has requested that I be terminated immediately. And so I'm sitting there like, can I ask what I did? And they're like, we don't know. They won't tell us. And so I'm like, okay. I said, I was like, I didn't really know how to respond. I said, well, I wish I, had some idea of what I've done wrong, so that I could perhaps defend myself. And then they request, they say that they don't know. They have no idea why. The client's just adamant about it. And then they say, Facebook security would like to see your cell phone. And I'm like, what? Because this is not company property, mind you. This is my personal cell phone. And I tell them, because I know that on my phone, there's nothing in there that would incriminate me in any way. If they had looked, even if they had seen the text between James and I, like I said, the entire exchange was Happy New Year's and a couple selfies, including me holding a goat. Nothing nefarious. And so I asked them, I said, well, if I let you see my cell phone, do I get to keep my job? And they said, no. So I'm looking at them like, then no, you can't see my personal phone. And so then they proceed to interrogate me for 2 hours. We go round and round and round, and they're just really adamant about wanting to see the cell phone. They're like, oh, well, Facebook security says you can look over their shoulder while they look through your phone. And I'm like, no, I'm not giving you my phone. And so this conversation just goes nowhere. And so after 2 hours, I finally look at them. I said, listen, I said, clearly we're not getting anywhere with this conversation. Can I leave? And I will never forget that response. Their response is, well, legally we can't detain you.
Okay.
Like, is the implication there that if you could, you would detain me in this office? And so that's exactly where the point where you were introducing me, that's when security escorts me out of the building, doesn't even let me go to my desk to clear it out. And that was the end of my employment at Facebook.
All right. So did they ever pack your personal stuff and give it back to you?
Only after, so 2 weeks later, after that happened, I had emailed them regularly to try and get, it was stuff like headphones, pictures of my daughter, knickknacks at my desk.
Sure. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, normal stuff. And after 2 weeks, I still did not have my stuff back. So I had to threaten to call the Austin Police Department on Facebook in order to get my belongings back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was intense. Like, I hadn't worked, that many civilian jobs up until that point, and I was blown away. I was like, is this normal? Like, there's a part of me that's like, is this how these big companies work? Is this, am I weird? And now I realize how truly bizarre that situation was.
Yeah. So you are fired from Facebook. You walk out, and I guess in some ways your life has changed forever.
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but after that, it was because I had been transitioning out of the military, and this was like an entry level position at Facebook, so I wasn't making a lot of money yet. Like I said, I was a single mom who put themselves through college, but I had to apply for food stamps. Like, it got to the point where me and my roommate were like, we got like another few weeks, and we don't know what we're going to do if we don't come up with enough money. So it was a real rough time in my life. And eventually I did get, because I was a good employee, the contract company actually ended up moving me to a different contract at Google, ironically. But I didn't,
That's hilarious.
I know,
That's hilarious.
Isn't it? Like, and originally I was supposed to do content review for YouTube, but they ended up putting me on customer service for YouTube TV. And so I didn't find anything interesting at YouTube TV, which is essentially a cable TV replacement service. But yeah, it was crazy. So yeah, that was that. And then the whole situation with my daughter happened when I was because after that whole incident with Facebook and I didn't like the job at Google, I was like, you know what, I want to get out of the tech industry. And I was actually getting ready to become a dance teacher here in Austin, Texas. So that's what I thought my life was going to be. And then the incident with my daughter happened. And that's when life took, like, already my life is taking some weird turns. And that's when completely changes. And
be sure to use the link in the program notes to get Cassandra's book, Impact: How I Went Behind Enemy Lines and Our Struggle Against the Far Left. This is a story you got to read. Yeah. So what was the incident with your daughter? What was that? It was a custody situation?
Yes. My daughter at the time, I had already been fired from Facebook, but my daughter was supposed to come home after summer visitation with her dad. And the day before she was supposed to arrive, I'm texting him and I'm like, hey, like, let me know when you guys are on your way. And he's like, yeah, I'll let you know once we're on the road. I'm thinking everything's fine and normal. My daughter's enrolled in the local middle school where I lived in Texas. I had her signed up for summer camp. I had already paid for summer camp. And I'm like, okay. And I'm getting ready to start this new career as a dance teacher, because I'm thinking to myself, like, it's a ballroom dance studio. Like, that seems like an acceptable place where I can, have my daughter after school and she can kind of hang out there. And I'm like, this will be great. We'll start a new life here in Texas. She never shows up. So eventually, after many panicked phone calls and everything else, I find out that my ex-husband has decided that he's going to let our daughter stay in Virginia with my father, who at that time had he very somewhat gradually, I mean, I think I see the signs before now in hindsight, but after my younger brother died of a heroin overdose in 2015, my father gradually went more and more in the direction of religious extremism. And so by that point in time, he and I had a complete falling out. And my father decided that he should raise Jason and I as daughter, and not Jason or I, even though Jason, even Lexi's father's not like, obviously I don't like the guy, but he's not an unfit parent by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
So we end up in court, and I think to myself, like, my child was basically kidnapped. You think to yourself, like, it's going to be fine. Like, you're going to go into court and they're going to give you your kid back. Like, this is pretty cut and dry. But my father is a multimillionaire. We're in this small town in Virginia. And even my Facebook whistleblower status is used against me in family court. He basically tries to make it sound like I'm delusional, because this is before Project Veritas has been able to publish the story, because they're still going through all their verification stuff. And so my daughter is taken from me.
Yeah. So you mentioned that James O'Keefe was there to support you through this?
Right. So I ended up, after the first hearing, I ended up becoming a full-time journalist for Project Veritas.
Okay.
I abandoned the dance teacher thing because that was really a career that I was looking for, something that was, really family friendly. And I was ready to leave Project Veritas as something in the past, because, being an undercover journalist is not exactly a family friendly job. So after a year of me working at Project Veritas, I save up enough money to, go back to court. And James actually, I ask him and he agrees to appear, to talk about, especially explain the fact, yes, this girl is a corporate whistleblower. Like, the story was on the news. We've released it. Like, it's been confirmed by Facebook that, she was fired for leaking these documents. And but this tiny little court, even though between the first hearing and the second hearing, my daughter gets pulled out of school. And my father starts essentially a group home for foster children. And he has, at this point, 4 foster children living in this house with my daughter. And whereas she has 2 able-bodied parents who are able to take care of her, but for some reason she's living there. And so I thought, once again, I go to court thinking to myself, like, okay, well, now I'm making, I'm not on food stamps. I'm not impoverished. I have a good job. I've been at my job for over a year. My boss is even here to testify, to be like, she's a good employee. And the court says there's been no significant change of circumstances.
It's amazing.
I know. It was extremely corrupt. And I mean, even James and I, we looked at each other like, you've got to be joking me. And so it was interesting, though, because James O'Keefe is a very tall man. He's probably like 6'1", whereas my father's a very small man. He's 5'3". I describe him as having a Napoleon complex, which is extremely accurate. And so at one point, before we go into the courtroom, James intentionally stands like very close to my father, because he knew the guy was just like a scumbag at this point, and he just physically and metaphorically just looks down on him, like, how dare you take this child away from your own daughter? You do, who does that to their own kid? And because of that, I was actually able to see her for lunch, like maybe a month after the hearing. I had not seen her in over a year.
Wow.
Since then, I've only seen my daughter twice, and it's been over a year since I've seen her since, because it's just been nonstop. I've spent over a year's salary fighting this in court. And so that was one reason why I decided to write and eventually release this book. Is it actually started as me journaling when I was an undercover journalist, because I wanted her to know what kind of person her mother really was.
So this custody battle is still going on, so very actively.
Right. In some ways, it's inactive in the sense that I ran out of money. I'll be just upfront about it. I ran out of money. My father has, millions of dollars. I do not. He's fighting it in Virginia, where he lives. I live in Texas. And so I just couldn't afford to keep fighting, because we had to take it to an appeals court. And then I found out the appeals court is in literally the same like building and courthouse as the corrupt court I've already dealt with. And I'm like, you're joking me. I'm never going to get a fair hearing in this, tiny town with one stoplight. Like, so now she's living in a foster group home, hasn't been in school in years, and like I don't even know how this is legal,
Mm,
frankly.
it's amazing. So that's absolutely amazing. So, so you were working with at Project Veritas. There was a couple
Hmm.
other things you were with Beta O'Rourke, and
Yes.
you spent some time with some Bernie Bros too in
Oh
Iowa.
yeah. Yeah.
So so tell me a little bit about what that was all about. Let's go to Beta. I just love Beta.
Yeah. So the Beto O'Rourke story, this was during his Senate campaign in 2018. Mind
Uh-huh.
you, this is right after, like within a week of me deciding that I was going to work at Project Veritas full time. I am on a plane to El Paso. Um, and so I'm inside his Senate campaign, and I'm there for weeks at a time. And this is one of the things I talk about is, people have certain assumptions about Project Veritas and definite absolute misconceptions. I'm there. I don't know what the story is going to be or if there is even going to be a story. All I can do is talk to people and be curious. I can bring up a topic of conversation, but I can't put words in anybody's mouth or make anybody do anything.
Hmm.
So one evening, I'm there. I had been in the office all day, in the Beto O'Rourke campaign office. And all of a sudden, like the campaign, he was the field manager. So he was above all like the field officers or
Hmm.
whatever. And he says that there's a bunch of migrants who have arrived from the caravan early, and ICE has just released them, and let's go use the campaign money to buy them supplies. um, so we literally go on this adventure where we go to the grocery store using campaign finance, prepaid, credit cards, and we are loading up just carts and carts full of supplies. And these staffers are talking about how they're going to hide it on the FEC forms. They're like, and I was using the name Jennifer. They're like, Jennifer, if people found out about this, we could get in really big trouble. And I'm like, yeah. And I remember this one girl, I'll never forget it. We're in the car after we had finished going to the store, and we're about to drop these supplies off to these migrants. And she says, you know, I really hope the wrong person doesn't find out about this. That was one of those moments. I was glad it was dark in the car because I kind of had to cover my mouth to keep from smiling. And I was like, yeah, it would be real bad if the wrong person found out about this. So,
Oh gosh, yeah, it's amazing that people will do stuff that's illegal even when they know it's illegal, and just we'll continue on. So, was there any fallout from that, or from your investigation there?
as far as, because I mean, that went all the way up to the campaign manager. The last day I went to her to ask, to verify that she knew what was going on and what the other employees were doing. And that's, I mean, that's the top of the campaign besides
Sure.
the candidate. And she told me, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So, but as far as like fallout for me
No,
or,
legal fallout for anybody involved in that stuff.
no, I think what they did is, so we had to release that story before the election, obviously.
Hmm.
But it was not before the FEC filing deadline. So they tried to claim that it was a planned charitable contribution. And
Okay.
so I think they just went back and like changed some forms, but
Okay.
it was obvious that beforehand they were very concerned about people finding out. Was because I mean, I have them at least 4 or 5 times talking about like, oh, I think it'll be okay as long as we don't advertise it. Like, oh, if people found out about this, we could get in a lot of trouble with the FEC. So they were well aware of what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and let's talk about the Bernie Bros.
Yes.
Who
uh,
are so I gather they're a little bit more communist than
oh yeah. I had this one Bernie bro, Kyle Jurek. He he mansplained to me outside the office, that he was in fact an anarcho-communist, and felt the need to explain to me what that meant. And this is the guy who people joke about like re-education camps and gulags and whatnot now. I said that's kind of where this all started, was this Bernie bro and several other Bernie campaign staffers, very unironically, not in a joking manner, talking about the need to re-educate Trump supporters and how they
Oh,
should be
yeah.
put into camps. And to me,
Former
I was like,
Secretary of Labor, in the Clinton, what's his name? Rubin. He said that. You know.
oh yeah, and AOC's talked about like, the
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
take away the
yeah,
children of Trump supporters and re-educate them.
yeah.
And so this guy was like this guy was talking about um killing the Clintons. He was talking about all sorts of just like how if people didn't want to get on board with the revolution, that they should be like lined up on the beach and shot. And it was shocking even to me. Like at that point I had been working at Veritas for, probably about a year. I thought I had kind of heard it all at that point. But
Hmm.
when those kinds of things started coming out of a campaign staff, a paid staffer, mind you, this is not some Yahoo who just decided to volunteer on the Bernie campaign. Wouldn't be newsworthy then. But this is a paid staffer's comments. And then he's saying he has an Antifa sticker on his laptop. And he's saying how most of the people in the campaign think like he does.
Hmm. It's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I think a lot of people don't realize how deep a lot of these people are, basically in organizations like Bernie's and others people. And
Oh yeah, and he would say things like, "Oh, well, you're not going to get Bernie to talk about gulags publicly, but I think Bernie would be on board for re-education camps." Like, and I'll never forget though, my favorite line from that I legitimately had trouble not laughing when he said it is he was talking about how most of the time he considers himself an anarcho-communist, but sometimes he's more of a Stalinist, depending on his mood that day. And he said, "If you don't love me at my most communist, then you don't deserve me at my most anarchist." That was a line of his that I will never forget that came out of that gentleman's mouth. And I use the term gentleman lightly.
Yeah, yeah. So what was this? Ran across me. It said something they were trying to pick on ICE agents in Des Moines, Iowa. Was that?
Oh yeah. And so this Bernie bro, he talked about how if Bernie didn't win the primary, how they were going to take it to the streets, how they were going to start beating up cops. They were hoping that ICE agents would show up in Des Moines, Iowa, because they wanted to get into a fight with ICE agents, these kind of Antifa type people. And it was really interesting because all this happened in 2019, mind you, when this was all came out. And it was kind of a precursor to the violence and the riots that we saw in 2020.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, a lot. And I'm sure that in some of that may have been just trial runs too. Um, so you've gone through this, and you've been with the Bernie Bros and with the Beto O'Rourke's and everything else. Uh, you've been able to a certain extent maintain your undercover status.
Yes.
Okay, and then it got revealed who you are.
Yeah. So
Tell us a little about that.
so I left Project Veritas at the beginning of 2020
Mhm.
is when I stopped working there. And so, COVID happens. And so my next career plans those go to the wind. And I'm just sitting around and, at home like everybody else. And then that summer, all of a sudden, I get a call from somebody saying that they're a reporter and they'd like to ask about my involvement in the 2020 election. And I'm like, what? Like, what is this? And so I just hang up the phone, right? And I call Project Veritas and I let them know. And then a few days later, just hit pieces start coming out about me.
Mhm.
And there's people outside my house. I'm getting harassed constantly on the phone. I have people pretending to be like former coworkers at Project Veritas, like contacting me from weird email addresses, claiming to be other people. And ultimately, like I moved to another town and I think that maybe it's ended. And then the weirdest story, definitely by far the weirdest, is I had gone on a date with like I hadn't dated anybody in years because obviously Project Veritas is the kind of job that takes over your life.
Sure.
So I go on a couple dates with this guy, and he had come over one day, and when he left, he's like, "Oh, hey, next time I come to your house, I think I got to find somewhere else to park because someone's giving me a dirty look." And I'm like, I live in like a pretty open residential neighborhood. There's no shortage of parking. And I'm like, that's weird. And I try and tell myself like, oh, Cassandra, you're just being paranoid. Like, don't worry about it. Nobody's following you. Stop being paranoid. Well, the guy like vanishes. And so I'm just like, oh, what a jerk. Right.
Sure.
And he resurfaces maybe like a week or two later, and I'm, of course I go off at him like, how dare you feel like you could contact me after ghosting on me? And he's like, well, you don't understand. He's like, I promise, like there's a reason for this. And so I'm like, fine, let me entertain your reason. He comes over and he shows me that someone had taken pictures of him and I outside of my house. And he's like, someone contacted me on Twitter and said that they were a reporter, and they sent me these pictures of you and I outside of your house. And they're like, hey, we know you know Cassandra Spencer. Please contact us on Signal, which is an encrypted messaging app. And so, yeah, that was my breaking point. That was when, until then, I didn't plan on going public. But I said, this dude did not even know what Project Veritas was until I had told him. I said, and that was when I flipped out because these hit pieces already come out about me, the first few.
Sure.
And I said, now you're involving people. It's one thing to talk about me. Like, I decided to work for Project Veritas. I understand that's a controversial job. I understand that people are going to, say negative things about me because of that. But now you're involving random people who have nothing to do with Project Veritas. And freaking them out and being stalkers. I mean, this happened over the course of like 2 months. So, these people were following me. And that was, to me, the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, okay, I'm going public. And that was, you mentioned Michelle Malkin interview. That was one of the first interviews I did after I made a video on Twitter and said, hey, my name's Cassandra Spencer. I used to work at Project Veritas. These media people have been harassing me nonstop.
Oh gosh, yeah. So, are you still being hounded?
I always feel like I have to keep, I'm always looking over my shoulder now. It's definitely affected me. It has affected my ability to, like, I cannot find a normal job now because of all the stuff that I've dealt with. It's made it really difficult, which is another reason why I decided to write this book. I said, I need to be able to tell my story. I need to, and I decided that this is what I meant to do with my life, right? Like, is to continue advocating against big tech, to continue advocating for transparency, to continue fighting the far left, as well as advocating for things like family court reform, just because of the journey that I've been on in my life.
It's a shame, but 20 years ago, this would have been a great screenplay. But now, no one will touch it. I mean,
no, I'm a conservative. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
even though I heard the Daily Wire is getting into the movie industry, so Daily Wire, if you're interested in the story, hit me up.
have your agent come. So now there was I guess there was some sort of big tech was attempting to play nice with some of the conservatives, and they invited him over for lunch or whatever. I'm just making shit up. Lunch, but they invited James over, and he couldn't go, but he thought like maybe you might be a good representative. How did that go?
Yeah. So for a while, and this is when I was back at Veritas. So we're going back to 2019, before my identity was leaked. They had reached out to Project Veritas and had invited Project Veritas to attend a roundtable discussion, with several other conservative groups and representatives from Facebook. And so James is like, okay, well, we'll send Cassandra, that'll be great. She can ask them flat out, like, why are you doing this? Because she knows exactly what's going on at the company. And so we sent them my information, no trickery, nothing like that. We gave them my real name. We didn't try to send me in under a fake name. And literally like the day before I'm supposed to go to their DC office, they send an email to Project Veritas saying, Cassandra Spencer is banned from Facebook premises. So, which to me just shows they have something to hide, because obviously they know I'm not any kind of security threat as far as their physical security goes.
Sure.
But yes, they would not allow me on the Facebook campus. So
Yeah.
I'm apparently very threatening.
I guess so.
Very dangerous person.
Yeah. So you've written a book, and I would suggest for people listening to go ahead and buy it. Impact: How I Went Behind Enemy Lines in Our Struggle Against the Far Left. It's an interesting read with lots of little stories and quirks that you would never anticipate, or maybe you would nowadays. I find nothing surprising anymore, and
I know
and
that feeling.
yeah, so I find nothing surprising. So what's in your future now?
So we've teased it out a little bit, but I'm actually, after I stopped I can't go undercover anymore, obviously. My identity's out there. But I wanted to continue fighting against big tech. I wanted to continue, fighting against these far left violent ideologies. And so we decided that, the best way to do that, to continue that work, is to run for office.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting here in Texas, since I already have one very powerful enemy, Mr. Beta O'Rourke, as you put it. So it'll be an interesting time, because I know at least one prominent Texas politician who hates my guts.
Uh-huh. So what are you going to run for?
We haven't announced yet. I think we're eyeing a congressional run here in Texas.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of interesting. Out of this whole experience, what would you say was the thing that surprised you the most?
I think the thing that surprised me the most is, no matter how many times you fail in life, like, mind you, I decided that if I was going to write this book, I was going to be so transparent about my own failures, whether that be like the things that happened to me that I had no control over, and the things that were absolutely 100% my own fault. No matter how many times you get knocked down, you can always get back up, and you can always become better than what you were. Many times I thought to myself, like, this is it. I've peaked already, my life's, and that's kind of like, what you're trying to do with this podcast is, you want to help people who are older, live awesome lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's never too late to live, a fulfilling or awesome life.
you're a little young to be considering things being over.
I feel old.
Well, this will age you, but you don't. I'm sure it's been, I mean, you're laughing. You got a good sense of, how should I say, good attitude about it now, but going through it had to be an absolute shit show. I mean, it is something that's hard. People say, oh, if I did that and that, and people got this idea of, oh, I could do that, or whatever. A lot of people think, well, I could do that. No, probably you can't, because it's really hard. So it will change who you are as a person, but in some ways it steals you for the rest of the things that are coming down the pike. Hopefully not too bad.
Well, and this is what I say, though. My response to that would be that it's just a matter of being in the right place and the right time, and choosing to make the right decision, to do the right thing, and not the easy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things are usually not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And not a single day goes by, despite all the crap I've been through, and it's a lot of crap, that I ever regret the decision to do what I did. Getting to help tell other whistleblowers stories as an undercover journalist, seeing how, because I was the first whistleblower at Project Veritas, and seeing how that has just grown and expanded since then. It's really, validated that you did the right thing in that moment, even with all the crap that came with it.
So if you had to counsel someone that is seeing evil or something going on and they wanted to take a stand or make it or bring it out into the light, what would you tell that person to expect?
I would tell them to expect that, there are going to be hardships. The odds that you will have, you could lose your job, you could lose your income, you could go through a lot of, I would say the immediate impact is usually felt financially, right? And so to prepare as much as possible to try and, lessen the impact of that. But realize that no matter how bad things get in that moment, that there is an army of people who will support you on the other side. People will be so glad that you did the right thing when you had the opportunity, and that if not you, then who? If you're in the position to blow the whistle on something that's really wrong going on, and that's in any industry, whether it's tech or government or, healthcare, anything, really, then do it, because all it takes is people who have moral courage to continue standing up, and that's how society actually changes. That's the only way for actual change to happen.
Yeah. Well, I gotta give you a lot of credit because it took a lot of courage and to be involved in this and in the way that you were, and then dealing with the aftermath. It was and still, this obviously will follow you for the rest of your life. And I think for many people will consider it actually a good thing that you did take the courageous stand of basically letting people know what was really happening behind the scenes and the censorship that's occurring and all the other stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's like I said, I told my parents when I walked out by security that day, was it worth it? Yes. The answer is still, was it worth it? Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Cassandra, this has been very, very interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Old Guys program. As I said, we're a little bit off of the normal beaten path, but sometimes we do that, and especially if there's if there's an incredibly interesting story, which I think you are. I hope your book sales go well, and I hope you get booked on on some big shows, not like mine. No.
You know what? I love talking to people. I love sharing my story. And if one person, you never know who that one person who's going to be in a position to either blow the whistle to make a difference. And, even in my family court case, you never know when that one person's going to be listening. So I'm more than happy. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, you really don't know. Again, I would encourage everyone to go out and buy Cassandra's book. I assume it's available on the other big tech company, Amazon.
Yes, yes. I know. I was like,
yeah,
when the publisher said, "Gotta put it on there."
You gotta put it on Amazon. There's just no doubt about it. So good luck. We're be curious to follow your career and see where you end up in Congress and all that stuff. I think that that's exciting, and it points to a bright future for you.
Could you imagine having a former tech whistleblower being able to question Mark Zuckerberg in one of these hearings?
Oh, I think it'd be funny. It'd be fun.
It would be amazing.
I think that would be absolutely pretty funny. That would be pretty funny. This is Oris, the official old guy at oldguytalkstome.com. Remember, it's all about creating a kick-ass life for yourself and those that you love. And sometimes that requires, doing a difficult thing that needs to get done. Until next time. Now, I want to make sure that you do 3 things. 1, subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes. 2, share it with your friends because They need to hear this information also, to get this stuff so they can have a kick-ass life. And 3, review this podcast. And if you've got a bad review, that's fine too. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe, share, and review. Until next time, remember, it's all about creating a kick-ass life for yourself and those that you love.